I thought I would have the place entirely to myself. Just a quiet weekend, a crackling fire, and some long overdue rest. But when I arrived, I found the front door unlocked. I stepped inside, and there they were. My husband's friends, already settled in, chatting amongst themselves like it had been planned all along. Apparently, it had been. I just wasn't the one who was told. I wasn't expecting anyone else to be there. The plan, as my husband Ryan had explained it to me, was beautifully simple. I would head up to the cabin a day early, get some precious quiet before the chaos of the weekend descended. It was supposed to be just me, the stillness of the woods. Maybe a fire if I could manage to get one going, and a book I'd probably just skim through before falling asleep far too early. But when I pushed open the heavy wooden door, I heard voices, ones that were immediately, if distantly, familiar. It took my mind a second to place them, then I stepped all the way inside and saw them. Liam, Owen, and Cody. Ryan's old college friends. I hadn't seen them in years, not all together like this, but their faces were hard to forget. They were the kind of people who left a strong, lasting impression and rarely needed reintroducing. "Look who finally made it," Liam said with a welcoming grin, as if I were the one running late to a party I didn't know I was attending. He stepped forward and offered to take my overnight bag. I hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the surprise still registering, but I let him take it. He placed it gently near the door, then motioned with his head toward the living room. "Ryan told us you were coming up tonight. He thought it might be nice if you didn't have to settle in all alone." The fire was already burning brightly in the stone hearth. The dining table had been set for 4, and a bottle of red wine sat open aside 3 glasses, one of which was still half full. It looked like they had made themselves completely at home, maybe a little too easily. Owen leaned back against the kitchen island, watching me with a casual, friendly gaze. Liam said, "You liked red? We took a guess." I glanced at the bottle, then back at him. He remembered that. Owen shrugged, his posture relaxed. "Ryan's talked about you a lot over the years." I gave a short, slightly breathless laugh, a polite one. I think I said something like, "Well, this is definitely a surprise." And it was. I wasn't upset, not really. Just a little caught off guard, a little unsure of what kind of evening I had just walked into. But the truth is, even in that initial moment of confusion, I didn't feel out of place. And the way Cody glanced over from the deep armchair he occupied, his expression calm and entirely unreadable, made it clear they hadn't just shown up. They were already settled in, a part of the house. For a fleeting second, I thought about calling Ryan, but I didn't. We didn't sit down right away. I took off my coat, hanging it by the door, and let the radiating warmth from the fire settle deep into my shoulders. It felt exactly like I had walked into something that was already in motion, as if the evening had started hours before without me. But somehow, I wasn't an outsider. They had just finished making dinner. Steak, roasted vegetables, something fragrant with rosemary. The entire cabin smelled of genuine effort and a comfortable familiarity, as if they had done this exact thing, in this exact way, more than once before. When we finally sat down to eat, everything moved with an easy, unspoken grace. Liam poured me a glass of wine before I could even reach for the bottle. Owen pulled out my chair. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture that could have felt rehearsed or forced, but it didn't. It felt natural. I thought again about sending Ryan a quick message, just a simple check-in to let him know I'd arrived, but again, I didn't. We started the conversation on neutral ground, life updates, talk about work, a discussion about how long the new hiking trail up the ridge had taken the county to finish. The conversation flowed without any friction, as if they had already figured out the precise way to make it easy for me to join in without feeling interrogated. At some point, Liam glanced up from his plate and said, "You still pull your hair back the same way. There's always one piece left loose." I blinked, genuinely surprised. It was such a small, specific detail, something I did unconsciously and hadn't thought about in years. "You notice that?" I asked. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Ryan always said you had a particular way of doing things, like you'd already thought through 5 steps before anyone else had even caught up." I smiled at that, not because I fully knew what it meant, but because I remembered hearing Ryan say it once before a long time ago. Owen leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. "Back in college, he never stopped talking about you. We all knew he was serious about you from the very beginning." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Serious? How so?" "Serious enough that Cody had to tell him to stop bringing you up during poker night," Owen said with a laugh. "He said we couldn't keep track of what was real and what was just him daydreaming about you." Across the table, Cody gave a small, confirming shrug, still swirling the last bit of wine in his glass, his expression unreadable as ever. I laughed, maybe a little more loudly than the comment deserved, just enough to break the intimate stillness that was beginning to creep in around the edges of the table. I stood up and carried my glass into the kitchen, saying something vague about checking on the oven or rinsing a few dishes. Really, I just needed a moment to let the quiet catch up with me. The kitchen was still warm from dinner. I set the glass in the sink, ran the water, and leaned my hips against the counter while it filled. Liam walked in a few seconds later. There was no announcement. He was just suddenly present. "If anything about this feels off," he said, his voice calm and direct, "you can always say so." "It doesn't," I replied, and it was the truth. He gave a short nod and took the glass from my hand, rinsed it with a practiced efficiency, set it on the rack beside the sink, and then stepped back, giving me my space. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he added, "Ryan didn't give us much notice, but I'm glad we got a chance to say hello in person. It's been a while." I gave a small nod of my own. "It really has." And that was it. There was nothing strange, nothing left unsaid between us. We didn't talk much right after that, not in the kitchen, and not when I walked back into the living room. The fire had burned lower now, its glow softer, the occasional flicker casting slow-moving shadows across the paneled walls. I still had my wineglass with me, though I hadn't touched it since dinner. I sat back down in one of the armchairs, angled slightly toward the warmth of the fire. The others were nearby. Cody was on the couch, Owen by the window, looking out into the darkness. No one said anything right away, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. After a while, Cody made a quiet comment that I didn't quite catch. Owen looked over at him and then at me, translating. "He was just saying you still seem like yourself." I smiled at that. "I'm not sure what that means." Owen shrugged, his tone lighthearted. "Just that you haven't changed as much as we might have thought you would. That's a compliment, by the way." I nodded, accepting it. I didn't have anything clever to say in return, so I took a small sip of wine and focused my attention on the fire again. The room settled into a kind of deep, ambient calm. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't tense. It was just still, as if everyone in the room was letting the day wind down at its own individual pace. Cody asked if I remembered a hiking trip they had all taken during spring break one year. I did, but just barely. The memory was faint, a watercolor image, but it was familiar. His question sparked a bit of back and forth between the three of them, a story that I mostly just listened to. I was grateful for the distraction. The quiet moments weren't uncomfortable, but they carried a certain weight. The kind that made you acutely realize how long it had been since you'd really, truly slowed down. At some point, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once since arriving. There were no texts from Ryan, no missed calls. I thought about it for a second. The habit to check almost overwhelming, but then I let it go. "I think I'll turn in early," I said, finally rising from the chair. Liam, who had just stepped back into the room from the hallway, nodded once. "Let us know if you need anything." His tone was easy, casual. There was nothing in it but simple acknowledgement. I gave a small smile and glanced around the room one last time. The fire. The three of them, relaxed, quiet, not expecting a single thing from me. Then I turned toward the guest room and the promise of sleep, leaving the rest of the evening behind. I looked at Liam. His expression hadn't changed. It was still calm, still steady, as if he already knew I wasn't quite ready to disappear into another room just yet. So, instead of heading for the hallway, I turned back toward the fireplace. I sat down in the small chair near the hearth, angled slightly away from the others, not out of a desire for distance, just for a different kind of space. I wasn't avoiding them. I just needed a moment where I could finally hear myself think. The fire crackled gently. The room was quiet, but it wasn't an expectant quiet. No one asked me why I had stayed. After a minute, Owen got up to stretch his legs. He wandered over near the fire and paused by the window, looking out. "You always knew how to take up space without ever asking for it," he said, as if it were a casual, passing observation. He didn't linger after saying it, just gave a small shrug as if he wasn't even sure if I'd heard him, and then walked back to the couch. Cody stayed where he was, but added quietly, "You're still wearing that same scent. It always reminded me of early mornings." I remembered it right away. I didn't respond, not because I didn't appreciate the comment, but because I wasn't sure how to hold that kind of tender, specific detail in the middle of a quiet evening. Liam didn't say anything for a while. Then he stepped around and sat in the chair across from me, where the soft light from the fire fell gently across both of our faces. He looked at me without expectation, his presence simply a fact. Finally, he spoke. "Ryan told us you'd had a long few months," he said, "that maybe you needed some time away from all the noise." I nodded slowly. That part was absolutely true. He tilted his head slightly. "He didn't want you to feel like you were holding everything up on your own." I looked down at my hands, which were resting in my lap, not tense, just tired. "I didn't expect the house to be full," I said, my voice soft. "I know," he replied, "but we didn't come here to intrude. We just came to remind you that you're not doing this alone." There was no pressure in his voice, no hidden weight behind the words, just a simple, profound offer that I hadn't even realized I'd so desperately needed to hear. And in that room, with the fire burned low and no one rushing to fill the silence, I let the quiet sit a little longer. Some moments speak louder than any explanation ever could, and sometimes simply being noticed without judgment or expectation is the rarest kind of peace you can find. "Be honest with me. Do you wish you were there in that cabin too? If it were you, what would you be doing in that quiet moment? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading everyone."
Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts, like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more.